In Romans 8:31, Paul famously wrote, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" This has become a mantra for many Christians as we face the hardships of this life. But by now, it's been heard so often that it has begun to lose meaning. So let's take a deeper look at these words today and see how, when God is with you, nothing can be against you. This includes people, time, nature, and anything else you could possibly think of. We'll start with the most obvious example, and that is people. It's impossible to go through life without encountering people who stand against you and what you believe in. Christians are often mocked by friends, coworkers, and strangers for how we love and worship God. It can be hard to deal with this mockery, especially when it comes from friends. But God is with you, and He will give you the power to endure whatever non-Christians throw at you. If you don't believe me, just take a look at the story of David and Goliath. When the Philistines faced off against the Israelites, God's chosen people, they sent a representative to challenge one of the Israelite men. But the representative happened to be a literal giant, so the Israelites were afraid to fight him. David's faith in God was greater than his fear of Goliath, so he stood tall and announced that he would fight. As he walked on to that battlefield, David must have looked ridiculous. He was tiny in comparison to Goliath. Not to mention, he wasn't wearing armor because it was too heavy for him, and all he was armed with was a sling and 5 stones. The Israelites appeared to be doomed while the Philistines were sure of their victory. But what the Philistines forgot was that God was on the Israelite side. He was with David as he walked into that fight. In 1 Samuel 17:45, David tells Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David's real weapon was not his sling. It was the power of God. While the advantage seemed to be with Goliath on account of his size and weapons, it was really with David. Goliath didn't even stand a chance. David defeated him easily by sinking a stone into his forehead. I'm not using this example to say that you should sling stones at your enemies. On the contrary, God calls us to love our enemies. But David's story serves as a great example of how we can overcome anything as long as we have God on our side. The people you deal with on a daily basis probably won't be trying to kill you, but they can make you feel as small as David in front of Goliath. But we must remember that David was not the one fighting Goliath. God was. When non-Christians attack you for your faith, remember that God has more power than anyone or anything. He will stand by your side and help you face those who stand against Him. Sometimes, the hardship you are facing has nothing to do with other people, but has you racing against time. Time can feel like a very powerful and abstract concept. But like everything else, God is stronger and even more powerful than time. Maybe you've been diagnosed with an illness and you feel like you are running out of time on this earth to fulfill God's purpose in your life. Or maybe, like Zechariah and Elizabeth, you feel like you have run out of time to have a child. When an angel of the Lord appeared to Zechariah and told him that he and his wife are going to have a son, Zechariah asked, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man and my wife is well along in years." Zechariah's reaction shows that his faith was placed in the natural order of the earth rather than the power of the Lord. In earthly terms, their time to have a child was over, so Zechariah doubted that it would be possible. But all things are possible with God. Time and old age were not an issue for him. The natural earthly order of things applies to earthly things like people and nature. But God does not belong to the earth. He belongs in the heavenly realm, and therefore earthly rules do not apply to him. He created the earth, and he can manipulate it however he pleases. The phrase, "time is not on our side," never applies to God because time is always on His side. He created time. He is time. He existed before time, and He will exist long after time. So, if God is with you, then time cannot be against you. The same can be said of nature. Sometimes we feel like nature is against us when we suffer the effects of a brutal storm or natural disaster. Events like this can make us question our faith, but we must always remember that God is in control of nature and that He has power over it. When the Israelites were running from Pharaoh after escaping from slavery in Egypt, they reached a dead end at the Red Sea. The people complained to Moses, saying that he had led them to their death as they had no way to escape the Egyptians from there. But they forgot that God was on their side. They looked at the Red Sea and thought it would be impossible to cross. But the sea did not even present a challenge to the Lord. He commanded Moses to stretch out his hand, and just like that, the waters parted. The Israelites crossed the sea on dry land. Not only did God allow them safe passage through the waters, but He collapsed the waves at just the right moment to eliminate the Egyptians so that the Israelites would not have to worry about being chased by them anymore. Earthly gravity does not allow for seas to part like that. But God is greater than gravity. In this example, we can clearly see how God affected nature to make life easier for the Israelites. But you may be wondering, what does this have to do with storms? If God controls those, why does He allow them to do so much damage to His people? This is an easy question to ask, but a much harder one to answer. We don't receive specific answers for why God does what He does, but we do know that He always has a reason. For example, when Jesus was in a boat with His disciples, a great storm came upon them. Jesus was sleeping soundly while the disciples were terrified. They thought that they were going to die. They woke Jesus up and expressed their fears to Him. But Jesus remained calm. He said, "Where is your faith?" And He calmed the wind and the waves as if there had never been a storm at all. We can read about the effect this storm had on the disciples when they respond, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey Him." Luke 18:24. God used the storm to demonstrate His power to the disciples and reinforce Jesus' relation to Him. The way that Jesus controlled the storm solidified His position as the Son of God and demonstrated God's power that ran through Him. Just because there is a clear reason for this storm doesn't mean that we will understand the reason for all storms. But one thing we must understand is that there is always a reason, and that God has ultimate control over all of nature. Whatever natural disaster you face, God will be with you through it. He is greater than any storm. One of the greatest things we fear in this life is death. But even death cannot be against us when God is with us. In John 11, Jesus received word that his friend Lazarus was sick. Rather than rush to Judea to heal him, Jesus remained where He was for 2 more days. By the time He reached Lazarus, the man had been dead in the tomb for 4 days. His sisters, Martha and Mary, were distraught. They didn't understand why Jesus hadn't come to heal their brother before he died of his illness. But Jesus used this opportunity to demonstrate the Lord's almighty power. He opened Lazarus' tomb and called him forth. Lazarus walked out as if he had never been sick at all. While Martha and Mary had faith that Jesus could heal the sick, they didn't understand that He could raise the dead. So Jesus used their brother as an example to prove that God's power should not be underestimated. And this wasn't the only time God demonstrated His power over death. When Jesus sacrificed Himself on the cross, The disciples mourned his death even though he had hinted at his resurrection. Even when he presented himself to them 3 days later, they had a hard time believing he was real. They had seen Jesus heal the sick and raise others from the dead, but they didn't understand that he would be raised from the dead himself. Like Martha and Mary, they underestimated God's power. And because Jesus died for us and was raised from the dead, we have no need to fear death. As long as you place your faith in the Lord, you can look forward to death as the beginning of a new life. Death is not the end for us, but the beginning. When we say that as long as God is with us, nothing can be against us, it really is true. David proved that no person can stand against you, even if they seem much bigger and more powerful than you. Not even time or nature can compete against God. He has the power to give new life to the aged, to part seas, and to send and calm storms. Not even death can stand against God. God's power is wholly unmatched. So as long as He is with you, nothing can stand against you. On the other hand, if you don't have God on your side, you can be defeated by a tiny stone or a gust of wind. Take a moment now to connect with God and analyze your faith to make sure that you are with Him. The only way you can enjoy the benefits of God's power is if you give Him all of your faith and love in return. That's it. That's all He asks of you. The price you pay is worth far less than the gift you receive in the form of God's protection and power. With God on your side, you can live a life without fear because nothing can stand against Him.